Good evening and welcome to the Silicon Valley Entrepreneur, a series of conversations with startup founders, the investors who fund them. I'm Chris Gill, President and CEO of SVASE, the Silicon Valley Association of Startup Entrepreneurs. And tonight I'm very pleased to have with us John Hamm, author, entrepreneur, VC, and now leadership coach, here to talk about his new book, Unusually Excellent. So John, welcome.
Thank you, Chris.
Nice to have you here. So before we get into the book, can you give us a bit of background about this very diverse career that you had and how you've ended up being what is really an authority on leadership?
Well, thank you. I've been lucky enough to have a handful of experiences in the Valley that I consider myself fortunate to have had. I arrived here in 1983 out of engineering school and arrived at what I consider to be the beginning of the technical renaissance. Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess if you lived in Florence, you wanted to live there with Michelangelo. And I feel like those of us that were in the Valley from the earlier mid-'80s through the turn of the century and even into the first decade, we were really here for the renaissance of technology. When you look at the number of things that were created in this Valley in that 20-year period, it's pretty extraordinary. So I was lucky enough to be part of that, worked at Hewlett-Packard and at Adaptec and Western Digital, and was on the early founding team at Brocade. So I had a chance to really participate in a lot of the early technology development in the Valley. Mm-hmm. In 1996, I took some venture funding with a couple co-founders, and we actually created our own startup called Whistle Communications. And just short of 2000, we were actually acquired by IBM. So we went through the process of being digested by IBM, and I spent a little time there, but really realized I wanted to get back to the Valley working with startup entrepreneurs and in the whole technology arena. Okay. So I embarked in 2000 on what I thought was going to be a year or two of curiosity. I was interested in strategic consulting, I was interested in venture capital, and I was going to take some time off running companies. Mm-hmm. Well, that 1 or 2 years turned into a decade bucket list. And I ended up working at a couple venture firms at Redpoint, at VSP Capital, spent some time with Jeffrey Moore at the Chasm Group, and really had the opportunity also to do some writing for Harvard Business Review and a whole lot of advising and consulting work for CEOs and VCs on boards. Mm-hmm. So it's been a really interesting decade since 2001 when I embarked on what I thought was going to be a short list of other things to check out.
Right. Now, I do remember back in 2005, 2006, you had written an article for the Harvard Business Review, which I thought was a very revealing one. I think you were an EIR with...
I wrote two articles for HBR. One was in 2002, and it was called Why Entrepreneurs Don't Scale. And it was a pretty provocative look at the paradox of entrepreneurship in the Valley, because on one hand, venture capitalists tended to fund a set of attributes about entrepreneurs, and then it turns out if those skills really weren't developed, they turned into weaknesses later. And we saw entrepreneurs that really never made the leap into, from founder to leader or from entrepreneur to CEO, president, at term. So I thought that was a little interesting, and I checked out the whole idea of why entrepreneurs didn't scale into being, long-term CEOs in their companies. That article was very unexpectedly a big hit at HBR, and sort of inspired me to write a follow-on one about 4 years later called The 5 Messages Leaders Must Manage. And that was really about CEO communication and how much I believe CEOs and other senior leaders need to be more savvy and more, sort of insightful about what communications required in organizations.
Right. Okay. So you move from that, and two very insightful articles there, which were very big hits, widely read. You had a venture fund that you finally fully invested, and now you're a professor of leadership at the business school at Santa Clara University. How did that come about?
Well, Santa Clara is a great business school, and the dean at the time, Barry Posner, I think is very open-minded and very ambitious and aggressive, actually, at recruiting execs from the Valley to join the Santa Clara community and begin to spread some knowledge and some practical wisdom and advice. My interest in teaching was really because I just felt there was so little curriculum on leadership. Santa Clara actually is one of the schools with a more robust leadership curriculum than most. And so Barry asked me to come on to faculty and to teach in the undergrad school for about 4 or 5 years using his text, The Leadership Challenge. And I found that exciting. When my book came out this February, prior to that, I had been chatting with Barry and David Caldwell, who runs the business school, and they suggested that I move to the Graduate School of Business, teaching folks who were really in the workplace and getting an MBA at night, and use my book as the text. So that was a pretty neat opportunity for me.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's a very diverse set of experiences, and you've really been there and done it, and you've also helped other people be there and do it.
Right. It really is almost a four corners kind of orientation. I certainly was an operating leader and entrepreneur myself in medium, large, and startup organizations. I spent another sort of corner of the world investing, writing checks both institutionally and as an angel and a super angel. I put money on people. I made bets, and then I really began doing an awful lot of entrepreneur and leadership advisory work, where I took leaders on retainer and really took them into a leadership advisory program where we spent between 3 and 16 or 18 months together. And then the last thing is this teaching thing. So it all comes together. What holds it all together is my passion around entrepreneurial leadership. And I've just seen it from a handful of different angles. The book is written to sort of capitalize on the commonalities of those 4 views of leaders. And I think that's what makes it interesting, as I've looked at it from a couple different angles.
So let's get into the book,
Sure.
because now you do have this experience. You do have credibility in writing it. You've condensed down your experience into a very readable book. So you've got 3 main chapters. Can you talk a little bit about those? And who is this intended for?
This book is actually written for leaders. It's a book for leaders, not about them. There are some stories about leaders in here, but this is not a book for people that just want to read casually about leadership as almost nonfiction or almost a fiction, or a biography. This is really written for folks that are interested in the practice of leadership. So they're either practicing leaders themselves, they're investors, they're folks on the way up the organization, aspiring to learn leadership as a profession. And there's just not a lot of first account, material written by practicing leaders who had a view of it along the way. So I wrote it for leaders. I wrote it for people that want to get better at this game. The way I organized it, Chris, was to look at kind of the fields of play of leaders. I saw a bunch of patterns of things I thought were effective and not effective, and I really saw this at scale. I looked through my experiences with 70 or 80 or 90 leaders over a decade, and I began to see some patterns that things they did well, things they didn't do well, things that produced results, things that didn't produce results, and it was kind of shocking how recurring and predictable those patterns were after a while. It was almost like didn't you guys tell the guys before you, or tell the guys after you, how to do this?
Yeah.
So when I wrote the book, I decided to take it from the point of view or the helmet of the leader.
Yep.
And as I looked out at leadership and through the eyes of the leaders I worked with and my own as well, I really saw that there were 3 distinct areas of interest for leaders. There were 3 games at play, if you would. The first one, which I thought was relatively undervalued, was the game of credibility, the field of credibility. And that was really about earning the right to lead. And I thought that was a fairly undervalued field of play, especially in Silicon Valley, where it's so much about the idea and it's so much about the entrepreneur and it's so much about the technology. Leadership credibility had taken, in my mind, a little bit of a back seat. The middle of the book is written around really the second field of play, which I call competence, which is a skills orientation, and it really produces the results that we all care about. This is what we invest in. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to create results. The third area was a bit of an offshoot, and I think perhaps the least immediate, but perhaps the most interesting, which was really the long-term legacy or the consequences of leading. Leaders touch our lives and affect our lives in many, many ways. The folks that lead organizations that we're part of have an awful lot to do with the quality of our work and the quality of our life. And so I wanted to really call leaders to a values-based higher ground when it came to, what kind of organization are you going to build and what will people say about that 2, 5, 10 years from now? So the book's organized into credibility, competence, and consequence.
Right.
And there are 3 different fields of play.
Okay. And it's interesting that, just a little bit of a side on this, you use a lot of analogies to sport and particularly golf.
Yeah.
I take it you're a golf buff?
I am a golf buff.
Okay.
And it was a very easy place for me to make analogies. Golf is a very complex game where, first of all, getting the fundamentals right goes a long way towards playing it fairly well. And little things make a big difference in the mechanics of golf. I found the mental challenges of the game, the setup parts of the game, and just the attention to detail relative to the outcomes to be a pretty good metaphor. It's true in golf that if you get the 3 or 4 of the important things right, you're a long way towards being a competent golfer.
Right. So if we start off with the first part, the credibility part, this seems to be obvious, and certainly given one of the examples that you have in there, somebody who made an aside to a vice president said, this guy should be fired, and you think, well, if that was going to happen to him, what's going to happen to me?
Right.
How do people establish credibility? How do they lose it?
Well, as you say, it should be more obvious. There shouldn't even need to be a section in a book like this on credibility. But, the theory and the practice of this are pretty different in the world. I think we've also had the experience of people who struck us, or we came to know them as more or less credible than other people we had known. So human beings are actually very, very skilled at establishing a credibility score for other human beings. This is especially true when it's about us being willing to follow them, to make choices, to give up our opportunities in other areas. There's a very high opportunity cost for most talented people to choose to do one thing in the world. They give up the options to do the others. And credibility is that thing that allows us, or that makes us want to follow a leader. Credibility is something that I think most leaders underestimate. In fact, the survey data says, if you look at most employee surveys, they'll indicate that leaders take for granted their credibility. And what happens most of the time, frankly, is they mix up authority with credibility. They believe that because they have organizational power, that's the same thing as having credibility. Well, the truth is that power and authority are really not about relationship. They're about the ability to sort of make somebody do something because they quote unquote work for you. But credibility is really about a willingness. It's about enrolling in something. It's about the relationship that goes beyond the contract, goes beyond the paycheck, and really ends up in the domain of sort of a volunteer emotional relationship with the person that you want to be with, that you want to work for. So the credibility section is divided into actually 3 parts. The way that I observed that we establish credibility in the world and keep it is to be authentic, to be trustworthy, and to be compelling.
Okay, there's a lot of, I'm hearing the term authentic a lot these days. What does that actually mean?
It's unfortunate. When I wrote the book, I realized that word was sort of trending as, to a fad. It reminds me a little bit of the way we ruined the word paradigm a few years ago, where everything was a paradigm.
Yep.
So authentic, I think, is interesting because it has become a part of our public discourse and vernacular when it comes to leadership. And so you ask yourself, why would that be? Well, first of all, we're very clear about what not authentic is. Right? It means counterfeit. It means not genuine. It means not real. So if you had an inauthentic dollar bill or an inauthentic, CD or copy of it, wouldn't be the real thing. It's what we mean when we say authentic is give me access to the real thing. I don't want an imposter. I don't want an act. I don't want a screenplay. I want access to the real human being that I'm going to choose to follow. I really want to know that person. I want access to their humanness, to the person behind the job. So what authentic really means in this case is that we've had this idea that we couldn't really reveal ourselves to those who worked for us. If they knew too much about us, they would, have some edge over us, or we'd lose our edge over them. Sort of very caveman ideas, And paradoxically, it turns out that what people want the most is to feel like their leader is someone they can relate to. So in fact, authenticity is the basis for relating. If I don't feel like you're an authentic person, I don't feel like I can relate to you. Okay,
so being able and comfortable enough with yourself and with the people around you to be able to say, I screwed up?
Oh, certainly that's part of it. I mean, certainly the humility and the graciousness and even the making fun of yourself or laughing at yourself is part of what makes us real to other people. What the folks who work for leaders want is they want to believe that that person's a lot like them. Now, they don't need to believe they're exactly like them, but, somebody said it best when it came to politicians, I'd like them to be just like me, but better.
Okay.
So, it's sort of like they want them to be human, they want them to be real, but they also want to admire them. But they don't want it to be someone that they feel they have nothing in common with, they can't relate to. So being authentic really sets up the basis for being real and thus, having someone we can relate to.
And how do you lose that?
I think you lose it when you lose the courage to be yourself. I think there are moments that test us. They test us to say the thing we really feel, the thing we really believe. And sometimes we feel, for some reason, scared enough or concerned enough or uncomfortable enough to say something else, to be something else in the moment. To believe that perhaps acting a certain way or scripting ourselves a certain way would be a better idea at that moment. And we're scared, or it's a tough situation. We look to maybe a role model we've had or idea we've read about, or just something we think would work better than being truly who we are in the moment. And a lot of it comes down to just showing a little bit of ourselves to the situation. Telling people, hey, I understand this is a scary situation. I'm worried myself, but I have a plan, guys. Let's, just admitting those things that we all want to know about each other. Part of it is our failures and our shortcomings. Part of it is seeking feedback from others about what works and what doesn't work about us. And the other part is just having that courage to as a matter of principle, stay centered and stay yourself in the moment.
So, all right, I've accepted that. I'm good. I'm going to be me.
Yep.
Now to do my job, I've at least got to have some competence. And I know that's one of the factors in there.
Competence really is the whole second section of the book. The other part about credibility is just adding trustworthiness and compelling to authenticity. So what we want is to be able to relate to the people that we work for. We also need to be able to trust them. So authenticity and trust are really the conditions of a friendship. When we get to followership, we need to add a third component, which is you got to be doing something interesting to invite me into it. If you look at what Lance Armstrong did with Livestrong, I mean, he created a compelling cause. Mm-hmm. You wanted to be part of that. You wanted to get your yellow rubber wristband and, put your $2 in at the Nike store, and you were on the team.
Those bands are everywhere.
Right. Yeah. So the whole credibility aspect is really one that says, I can relate to you, I can trust you, and I want to follow you. And at that point in time, a leader has earned the right to lead. So the relationship's intact, the credibility is intact, the team's ready, willing, and able to go. What you just suggested is that we move from there into competence, which is exactly the middle section of the book. And competence really is not so much a matter of character, like credibility, as much as it's a matter of skills. So, the truth is that we actually need people to know what they're doing, right? If they're a pilot, they need to fly the plane. If they're a doctor, they need to know what to do when we're under general anesthesia. If they're a cook, they need to know what to do in the kitchen. So leadership, like any other profession, has a set of skills. And it's important that as leaders, we learn those skills. And I really divided those skills into the three big areas of leadership competence, which is leading people, leading strategy, and leading execution. Almost all challenges, all objectives, everything can be sort of parsed between people-oriented things to be concerned about, strategic things to be concerned about, and making plans, and then really taking action, creating results, which people call execution.
So if I'm a first-time leader, so I'm a startup CEO, I'm a startup founder.
Right.
I've hopefully attracted my team because they've seen that I've got an interesting idea, I'm at least reasonably competent in what I'm doing, and they've got some level of trust in me. What actually comes first? Is it the demonstration of I'm really competent at this, or the credibility?
Well,
can you help with that?
This isn't quite as neat and cut and dried as that, right?
It
does all sort of merge together for us when we're sizing someone up or assessing somebody in this area. In Silicon Valley, it's a little different because we are so attracted to the brilliance of the idea or the brilliance of the entrepreneur or the track record of the entrepreneur. As a venture capitalist, what I always looked for was, is this a truly cool idea, a truly compelling value proposition idea? Is the entrepreneur or entrepreneurs that are doing it, are these special people? Are these people that I think can really move that? And is this an interesting market? Is the size of the game these guys want to play interesting? I would say that if it's not an interesting idea, you better have a great team that can merge that idea, and if it's not a big enough market, you better find another one. Those three are very hard to sort of order or sequence. They certainly all end up being important. You can probably lose for any of those three reasons, either not great enough people, not a good enough idea, or not an interesting marketplace. But I think that out of those three, the most scarce is people. We can change the idea and we can point to ideas at different markets. But, the people part of it is the part that's truly special. And I think enormously compelling people are scarcer than enormously compelling ideas.
Oh, absolutely agree with that. We're talking about, if we have the competence with people, is competence about managing people, about leading people?
Well,
tell me more about that.
Competence really is about the skills it takes to run an organization, to lead an organization. Everything big in the world gets done through teams. So we can have brilliant ideas, we can have brilliant entrepreneurs, but if we're going to execute at scale, we're going to do it with a handful or more of people, like 5 to 5,000. And so as an entrepreneur or a leader, your skills are going to be organized around how do we get all those people to work in symphony and in harmony towards the accomplishment of this big idea that somehow we have together. And if you look at the skills required in people, it's really two things. It's getting enough talent that's fabulous and making a team out of that talent. That's the job of leaders when it comes to leading people. When we talk about strategy, we want to generate all the great ideas we can around this basic compelling value proposition. And then we want to make a plan out of it that we all believe in. So it's ideas to plan. In execution, what we really want to do is take all these people, get them into action around a plan we believe in, and ultimately create some results. So a leader's got a different job in each of those three areas, but it essentially means making teams out of talent, making plans out of ideas, and creating results out of action. Those are the competencies. So those things are matters of skill. They can be learned. They can be, mentored and coached and developed over time. We find people can get better and better and better at this. This is very learnable stuff.
And how? This is the people skill side is certainly something that I see a lot, that the startup founders it's not that common. Do you have a recommendation for how they can learn some of that very, very valuable and necessary skill on how to manage and motivate and bring together a team from people who've been perhaps engineering for their short work life?
Right. Well, part of the reason they're not that good at it is because it hasn't been interesting to them. We tend to get better at the things that we're interested in. And most entrepreneurs that are technical entrepreneurs have been interested in and paid most of their attention to technical things, to product ideas, to software ideas, to whatever it is that intrigued them and fascinated them and held their attention. So the fact they're not very good at it is either that they don't have a natural skill set in that area, or they just haven't paid much attention to it. So the first thing that would have to change if they were going to get good at this is they'd have to get interested. And if they get interested, they go looking for some people that know how to do this. If you're interested in something and you have some talent, you go find somebody who can help you. If you don't know how to take pictures but you're interested in photography, you go find a great photographer and you ask them to help you. Right. You ask them to teach you. You ask them you ask to learn from them. And so I think that we don't really know whether a lot of these folks are quote unquote good at the people stuff until they'd express an interest in learning about it, in coming up to speed on it. At that point, we begin to see, as in the Harvard article, Why Entrepreneurs Don't Scale, we begin to see whether there's really enough natural talent and natural acumen there to make something great out of one of those great entrepreneurs. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. I can point to a guy like Scott Weiss, who is a great entrepreneur, started the company Ironport, turned out to be also a spectacular leader of people, and was an entrepreneur that could scale. Scott was able to take an idea from 3 or 4 people that had a compelling technical aspect to it and take it to many hundreds of people, and the company was eventually acquired by Cisco for just shy of $1 billion.
Okay.
So Scott's one of those rare guys.
We should move on to the last part because
Sure.
we're running out of time. This is going past so fast. Consequences.
Yeah.
Talk to me about consequences then.
Well, whereas credibility is a matter of character and skills and competence is a matter of skills, consequence, or what you leave behind, reputation, legacy, it's really a matter of values. Leaders have lots and lots of opportunities over the course of the action to reveal their own values. Their own values really display themselves mostly in the way that they communicate with other people and the way that decisions get made in the organization. So as a leader, my call to action in this book was to say, listen, you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of opportunities to make decisions with and for other people, and to have communications with and to other people. And every one of those is on the margin going to reveal just a little bit more about what you value the most. So, if you look at an Andy Grove or a Bill Packard or a Steve Jobs or Dave Packard or a Steve Jobs or a Larry Ellison or any of the iconic leaders in the Valley, their decisions and communications over time have revealed their values. I just wanted to make leaders more aware of that.
Okay, and it is quite, you give an example there about somebody going down a corridor and saying, but it's a bit dim in here once the people are working, and they reacted to that and began changing the lights.
Yeah.
That sort of thing happened to me in my second company when it got big enough that I got to exactly that stage. I thought, geez, the impact you have on people, you don't realise until you see something like that it is different.
It's true. Leaders underestimate the impact of their words and their body language and their phrasing. And, on one hand, we don't really want to be held to that level of scrutiny in our words and our behaviors. But on the other hand, it's a natural social part of leadership. People look to us for clues as to how to feel. They want to know what we say to them in a position of leadership authority matters a lot. And I think it's important that leaders understand the impact of their words and actions.
Yeah, okay. So we haven't had time to go anywhere near as deep side of light, where unfortunately only about 30 seconds to go. Any last words of advice for leaders and would-be leaders?
I admire leaders. I respect that they want to do this for a living. I would say, keep at it. Seek others that you believe are good leaders and ask for, their tips and techniques and mentorship. And, just really never underestimate the impact that you can have as a leader. I think we tend to not really realize how important leadership is in everything we do in the world.
Well, John, thank you very much for coming along. I'm going to try and get you back again because we only just scratched the surface on this. Terrific interview. Thank you very much. So it's good night from me, Chris Gill, and hope to see you again next month. So that was terrific.
Thank you.